Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your busy day and your hectic schedules to join us. I'm sitting here with Rob Faulkner with T3 Broadband, and today we're going to discuss keeping you on top of BEAD funding. First off, Rob is a Chief Communications Officer with T3 Broadband, over 30 years of experience in the industry. Carrier side, OEM side, and services. So we've got a wealth of information, great background to back up everything that we're talking about with you guys today. So I'm going to turn this over to Rob and just let him kick things off. For those of you who have questions, go ahead and type them in the questions section of the webinar piece, and we'll address those. Around the midway point, there's going to be a pause to discuss some of the BEAD type questions, and then we'll just take that from there. So Rob, if you want to go and get started, thank you.
Thank you, Philip. I appreciate the opportunity. Again, today's topic is going to be on BEAD, the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, what it is, how it works, the things you need to do to request a grant from each state, which I'll get into. And then at the break, we'll go into some of the things that T3 does around being able to help you assess your network, your costs, and how to serve your constituents with BEAD money to meet the requirements in each state. So with that, I will start and provide first an overview of the BEAD program. I broke this into 4 areas: what the program is, what the goals are, who the stakeholders are, and then the schedule. So first, the BEAD program is a federally funded program, $42.5 billion for new broadband networks. And these networks are managed by the NTIA, which is a peer to the FCC, but it's not quite in the same regulatory. It's under the Department of Commerce. And NTIA will work with each of the states individually in their broadband office. One of the requirements to obtain money by each state is that a broadband office has to be in place and has to be approved by the NTIA, which has been done over the past 6 weeks. And I'll talk to the schedule about that later. And the states themselves are what you'll hear the term grant recipient. The grant recipient is, again, the fundamental aspect of what the broadband office does by applying the funds to the subgrantee, who are the actual carriers or organizations requesting funds to go build the networks within each state. One of the other aspects of the BEAD program, besides the $42.5 billion in federal funding, is that it requires at least 25% in matching funds from each of the service providers, again, the subgrantee. Each state may change that to up to 75% for some and others, but for the purpose of this discussion, we're including the 25% matching funds as kind of the baseline discussion point for what we're talking about here. When you add the 25% of the matching funds from each of the carriers that are going to request this and execute to the $42.5 billion, you get a total fund base right now of about $53 billion. And that'll come into play in some other areas. So there's a tremendous amount of money here with which to work. How you choose to work that by each state, what the requirements are, we'll go into, but it also shows some opportunities, but also some limitations based upon what the goal is for each of the programs. Fundamentally, what each state is supposed to do is provide at least 100 megabit per second download and 20 megabit per second upload, or 120 service, to as many eligible residential broadband serviceable location, basically a house or a multi-dwelling unit, as possible with this fund. So the baseline is cover as many homes as you can with at least 100 down, 20 up service. Currently, and there's still some tweaking on this using the broadband data collection map that the FCC has been putting out for the past year, there's about 8.3 million unserved locations and about 4 million underserved locations. An unserved location is defined to be those locations, those homes that cannot receive at least 25.3 service today. And underserved are those that are sit between 25.3 but not higher than 120 service. And those are critical because those define the serving territories on which the states will allocate the money. By the way, this is not typical of a government subsidy program, which is going out to just rural areas. There are many urban locations that, for any number of reasons, do not have strong broadband. So this includes rural and urban locations And some other factors that I'll put into play here is the equity and access piece of the title of the BEAD program is a major factor by each state and the NTIA in determining who is going to be a subgrantee recipient in terms of digital equity, inclusion, and communities of interest, which may mean tribes, may mean underserved economic areas, or other factors unique to that state or that location. So unlike the RDOF and the CAF programs or the RUS programs put out by USDA with Reconnect, this is much more socially inclusive of the serving areas, not just whether an area is or isn't at 25.3 or 120 service. And I'll come back to some of those discussions. Who are the stakeholders? Primary stakeholder, NTIA, they control the funding to each state. However, the program management and the fund disbursements from each state to each of the subgrantees is from each of the state's broadband office. And this is where it will get somewhat tricky. Some states are taking the speeds and changing the minimum requirements to 100/100 symmetric, or have not fully defined exactly how they're going to do their allocations yet. We'll get to the timeline in a second, but the states themselves are the ones going to be driving the actual funding mechanism. The recipients themselves, again, are the subgrantee, the service providers, the electrical co-ops, the rural LECs, or other organizations, tribes themselves, or communities that are not seeing other aspects of funding available to them to build their broadband networks. They are the ones that are going to be the builders of the network, the subgrantees. Now, as I said, this is a community of interest issues associated with a broader view of how to serve and serve with equity. So citizens in each state have a voice in this, whether they are unserved or underserved, as well as communities, I mentioned tribes, equity organizations, inner-city organizations for those areas that do not have strong broadband within their larger metropolitan areas. So there are many, many stakeholders, which is much different, and we'll get to when you actually get a grant requirement of how those have to be discussed and allocated in terms of discussion points with the state broadband office when you submit your grant application. Now, where we are on the schedule. As I said earlier this year, the states were all approved, states and actually the territories, Puerto Rico, Guam, other locations have funding mechanisms associated with it. The states have until December 27th this year to finalize their plans to the NTIA. Each of the 50 states and then the territories must submit their plans of how they're going to allocate their money, which has already been decided, and I'll get to that in a few slides, of how they're going to take their money. Each of the states is given about 100 million at a minimum, and then it goes up from there based upon the number of locations that are unserved and underserved based on the BBC map. So there's a lot of work that's being done by the state offices today. Some of you may have been in discussions with them. There's a lot of work across the states to coordinate and understand how they're doing this. Post 12/27 this year, the NTIA, we expect to take 1 to 2 quarters to analyze those applications, make any tweaks, and then late second quarter through the fourth quarter, the states can start accepting grant applications. So sometime within June, July of next year, we would expect that the states to start accepting the grant applications. And depending upon the quality of the grants and the speed of deployment that's being put forward in each grant and or the scale of the amount of locations that have to be covered in each state, those funds may be able to be turned very quickly or it may take longer. The goal is that from mid-2024, when the funds become available, through the end of 2028 is when the build completions have to be done according to the NTIA. We are hearing some states are pushing a more aggressive schedule, but until it's official, we're still holding to the NTIA's view that all projects have to be complete by 2028. Again, that may vary based upon state and how they're approaching this. Now, what are the grant requirements? Again, this is very different than just typically put an allocation in for RDOF or CAF or Reconnect and say, I'm going to need this much money as a subsidy to build this many locations past or whatever. Based upon a number of previous programs, the NTIA has said we're gonna put a much more upfront effort in analyzing each of the applications by a subgrantee in terms of the quality of the execution, quality of the network, the budgeting, having to make sure the money is already secured before the grant is approved. So at a core, you must document your capabilities across your revenue and marketing plan, basically how you're going to go to market and capture the customers, your network and technology plan, your operating plan, how you can scale your network into new areas or into an existing area and edge out, and then a very strong economic summary and business case. Inclusive with that, you must have a letter of credit for your matching funds in your application. So you must have to have your planning and your network design and your go-to-market design up front before you can get your letter of credit, before you can even submit the grant. So when we talk about the requirements and the planning effort starts now, we're not trying to scare anybody or put forth any sort of doom and gloom in terms of being behind. The requirements for BEAD are so different from previous ones that you really do need to start planning now. And depending upon the scale of your network, it could take 3 months or 6+ months to put all this together. On top of having all of this documented, having your registrations with the relevant federal and state organizations, having financial audits, and your matching funds, those are all very critical to have all coming together at the point that you can submit your application. And when that's done, that's typically put together on the grant basis with an executive summary, a strong project narrative, a certified technical plan saying that, yes, this is how you're going to deploy it, how you're going to operate it, your budget, what it's going to cost to go perform that, and then backup information associated with those costs and estimates that the state can review. And then obviously, if the state, once they get the application, has any feedback or asks you to cure any questions, there has to be a time period to do that, to respond, edit, adjust, requote, or verify a question or anything else. We expect that to take another 1 to 3 months in terms of once it's submitted, the state, depending upon the scale of your application, needed to review that and everything else. Again, BEAD specific grant requirements, the matching funds and letter of credit, absolutely minimum. If you can get 75% matching funds, that's even better, but at a minimum, you've got to show that you actually have a letter of credit pre-approved before you can submit. Audited financials according to the gap compliance rules, FCC compliance issues in terms of probably speed tests and things like that. We're expecting them to follow the same compliance as RDOF and CAF and RUS. Any NEPA issues, depending upon where you're building, any tribal areas, a cybersecurity plan, so it's not putting your customers or your network at risk, and any other restrictions on equipment use, including the Buy America, Build America, which is a piece of this, which is requiring heavily US sourced materials. Specific to the Build America, Buy America plan, there is discussion right now that the NTIA is probably going to have a very strong conduit and fiber requirement for this. However, electronics will probably get a waiver just because most networking electronics, optical or otherwise, are not sourced directly in the US. You might have seen some vendors that are starting to build more fiber optic plant in the US, or even optical for PON equipment in the US. We're seeing more of that, but that will not cover all the equipment that's needed to go deploy this. So when you take that 3 to 6 month planning window and then the application and feedback window, you're looking at 4 to 9 months before your money comes in, and then they're going to have the award window. Once the award is granted, there is a compliance reporting function that must be required during the build phase, a final report to the fund administrators as it goes along, and then the post-completion reporting. So there's a lot of other hands-on reporting that both the state and the NTIA are going to require you to do, along with, as I mentioned, very specific award requirements, the Build America, Buy America, Davis-Bacon Act, Affordable Connectivity Program, the ACP, which is the other $22.5 billion that is being used out of the $65 billion fund for this, NEPA, and all the other aspects of capturing and tracking the money. So what solutions does BEAD funding support? Fiber, PON, FTTX, FTTH allowed? Absolutely. We expect that fiber optic networks will be the majority of where the funding goes. just because of its higher speed, and it is a kind of an end state for home networks in terms of broadband. Cable and DOCSIS solutions, we expect that to get certainly a large amount of money, just because the cable companies have both fiber networks and DOCSIS networks that they can extend out to some of these areas, and are doing that today. The cable companies do not want to cede their franchise territories to other players that are just outside their franchises, so they're going to want to go out and defend that, so they're probably going to be applying for that. But when it comes to alternative technologies outside of terrestrial networks that are fiber or cable-based, fixed wireless is an interesting proposition. The NTIA is allowing licensed spectrum and licensed by rule spectrum, in this case referring specifically to the CBRS spectrum, are applicable for funding. The speeds, we'll talk about this, but you can get those 100 down, 20 up speeds with those networks. However, unlicensed spectrum, which right now is 2.4, 5 gigahertz, and the upcoming 6 gigahertz networks that are going to be allowed, are not applicable for BEAD funding. We don't know where the 6 gigahertz will land, because there will be an automatic frequency coordination part of the network that's similar to CBRS SAS. And the government may say that 6 gigahertz will be allowed, but currently it is not in the allowable spectrum to be used. So if you have licensed spectrum, if you're looking at fixed wireless, and there's reasons to do that, which I'll get to, and CBRS is an option, and you have access either by ownership or by licensing other spectrum that is 2.5, 1.7, 1.9, whatever it happens to be, C-band spectrum, that is an option to consider, which can give you very, very good speeds, which I'll come to later. Satellite, however, at this point, no satellite broadband systems are applicable for BEAD funding. That doesn't mean that they won't be out there competing independently, but they're not able to be subsidized. So if you're partnering with a satellite provider, at this point in time, satellite is not a approved BEAD funding mechanism. Now, how do fixed wireless and fiber solutions compare? It's an economic issue, but it covers a lot of other territory, and I'll expand on this over the next few slides. Fixed wireless, the great thing about fixed wireless is that it's a one-to-many. You can put one tower up and cover hundreds of homes and meet your obligations. You can cover many BSLs, many other businesses, edge out areas that allow you to expand your cost structure and cover and capture as many customers as possible with a single tower or with just a few towers. It's a low to medium fixed construction cost to do so relative to a large scale fiber network. Especially as you go down to a lower density population area, fixed wireless can be very, very strong. I'll have some examples on that coming up. And you can provide 100 down, 20 up service and higher speeds today with fixed wireless. We have many customers doing that today. There's many different solution sets available to do that. So it is an option, and again, 120 is a starting point. There's evolution to go higher with that with new technology. However, fiber, you do have one-to-one coverage, so you know how many homes you have to pass, you know how many fiber runs you have to make. You have to pass every broadband serviceable location or every home, and it has very high construction costs, especially when you get to low density areas, but it can provide very high speeds and symmetric bandwidth. Some states are moving that way. We don't know if that will be a requirement on a majority of the states at this point, but we are seeing a bias towards that. And frankly, for high density markets, it can be a very, very cost-effective solution, just as in fixed wireless, but it provides that symmetric speed, and it's really where I think most of the governments want to get to. But I think there's still going to be an issue with funding and the amount of money available. $53 billion won't be enough to cover everything. So we like to promote a hybrid approach. Where you can use fiber, use it, and where if you to cover as many people as possible, use a fixed wireless solution. That tends to be the most capitally efficient approach when you are trying to cover the highest number of people in some of these more rural areas, or even some of the downtown areas that are going to be tricky to build to. So what is a hybrid network? what we like to say is that it's a combination network. It's a combination of fixed wireless, millimeter wave, point-to-point microwave, fiber, even cable. Wherever you can economically deploy the least expensive solution to cover the most number of homes to meet those requirements is the best solution. So in this case, you see in the microwave backhaul, you can send, on the top left example, a millimeter wave solution to a small neighborhood and provide fixed wireless to that neighborhood off of a single pole. And that can be a very efficient way than providing fiber, and I'll have some economic examples on that. You can also provide fiber very, very economically in dense areas. So again, it's where the costs are going to be the highest. As you go into the bottom where you see the trees with the lower density areas, a fixed wireless solution, even served with microwave backhaul, may be the most efficient way to do that, just based upon the cost, the terrain, or other factors. And then the very high density areas, you've got fiber, very large optical connections, and even peering to other buildings using point-to-point at very high speed. 20 gigabit point-to-point solutions are available today without having to put fiber in every building. So there's a lot of options here, and if you know the options and you start understanding the economics, you can plan your network to be, again, the most capitally efficient for what you're trying to achieve. So the BEAD funding by states, this is more of a reference. Basically, out of the 50 states in the District of Columbia, there's about $41 billion of the 42.5 allocated that the NTIA has provided information to each state. Texas, California are going to be the largest. Texas is basically twice as big as California, 3.3 billion. But interesting, Michigan and Missouri, because they have 300,000 unserved and underserved constituents, they're both getting about 1.6 to 1.7 billion dollars. North Carolina, $1.5 billion. As I said, every state, including the District of Columbia, is going to have 100 million minimum. So you see some of the smaller states are less populated, like North Dakota, Connecticut, Rhode Island. Those are getting slightly above 100 million. And then it just expands out across that based upon the view of how many unserved and underserved locations are available in each state. The aspect here is some states are going to be more susceptible to certain types of technologies because the money will only go so far. And other states, Rhode Island, Delaware, District of Columbia, those are probably going to be fiber-based just because the population density is what it is. This is an interesting view and a starting point, but until each state actually describes how they will allocate the funds and their specific requirements to do so, this is a point in time reference just as a discussion point to say that there's a lot of money out there. Now, how much to spend on coverage? Now, I said there's 53 billion, but if you take the previous slide and say the 50 states and District of Columbia, 41 billion, and then you add 25% to that, you get about $51 billion of money available for the network. And as I said, we're a big proponent of looking at the economics to drive how you're going to decide what you're going to be looking at and how you're going to allocate what should be fiber and what may be fixed wireless. So as a thought experiment, if you take the 8.3 million unserved locations, those areas that don't have 25.3 service or can't get higher than 25.3 service, leaving the other 4 million underserved locations off the table, you would be at about $6,100 per home passed using all $51 billion across the entire country on an average basis. Now, in our previous work that we've done with customers where they have done fiber and DSL construction for exurban, basically the areas between very rural and the suburban areas and rural locations under the CAF2 and RDOF programs, their cost to pass, whether it was copper or with fiber, was between $3,000 and $6,000 per home location per BSL. So $6,100 is already exceeding those numbers, and that's just covering the underserved. Some customers of ours have told us that when they look at the very rural location, again, the customers that are looking at the RDOF or the very, very high cost areas, they're looking at $8,000 to $10,000 per home passed to build. And that basically informs, and some of our customers even last week told us they believe that there's still not enough money with BEAD to cover fiber everywhere in parts of the country that they serve. Again, some of the smaller states I'm not as concerned about. Some of the low density states I'm not as concerned about. For the majority of the country, rural parts where I live in the Midwest, Southwest, even parts of the Northwest, especially in the eastern range of the Cascades, those are going to be very challenging based upon location density and the funding available. So this is another reason why, there's actually another data point that came out. New Mexico and Minnesota last week have stated that they do not believe that they have enough money to provide broadband to every constituent, and they're going back to their state legislatures to add additional funding within the state to put on top of their BEAD allocations. And I think this is just going to be the beginning once the state offices, the broadband offices, understand what their actual budgets look like and the cost to go build networks today. So when you look at a broadband assessment, as I mentioned, you have to look at this from a constituent standpoint, how you're going to go build this, and as much a geography and terrain as just how many homes I need to cover. In rural markets, what you tend to have is some very dense, small areas of localized downtown. Post office may be there, it may be 30 homes, 100 homes, something like that, where you can easily look at building a fiber construction for that efficiently. And then the first few homes outside of that suddenly get very, very expensive. And if you committed fully to fiber, you're going to be spending a lot more money on a full fiber network to get to those very rural homes than looking at this as a mixed model. So what we're advising is looking at this from a technical and an economic solution so that you take all of the factors into consideration on how you would apply for your grant and how you can serve your constituents most efficiently. In this example, I took an actual town that is on the BDC map, and right now it's underserved or unserved actually, with just satellite and some DSL. It's in the western half of the US. I won't name the town or anything, but the location had about half a square mile in the city center with about 100 homes in it. And so looking at that, you could string up aerial fiber very efficiently. I actually measured what it would take to go do that. It's about 7 linear miles of fiber at about $25,000 per route mile of aerial fiber to go build. When you take $175,000 divided by 100 homes, you get about $1,750 per home passed to go build a fiber network within that downtown area. That's a very competitive cost and very similar to a suburban or an urban market. So there would be not a strong reason not to build in that market with fiber. However, the first 3 homes outside of the town are 3 miles away. And you need to spend $75,000 just to serve those 3, or actually 8 homes, I'm sorry. The next 8 homes were 3 miles outside of town, and you'd have to spend $75,000 on aerial fiber just to go hit those homes. You're close to $10,000 per home pass now. When you take a look at all of the surrounding homes right around that area, there's actually another 50 homes that can be served within a 5-mile radius. And if you put up the fixed wireless solution with, for example, CBRS spectrum, you could actually serve those for way less than $4,000 per home pass with a fairly large tower. If you have a smaller tower, you could do this a lot less expensive. I think you actually do the $2,000 to $4,000 range. So when you look at how you would approach a hybrid network, serve dense with fiber, serve less dense with fixed wireless, you start seeing how you can make your dollars go farther and serve more constituents, which can also make you stronger when the states look at your grant requirements in terms of your application. So I'm going to pause at this slide. Really the key aspect right now is that the planning phase needs to start now. You've got 3 to 6 months before the states start opening their application window. There's a lot to do in terms of your business plan, your budget, getting your matching funds, which are again sequential because you can't really get your matching funds until you know what your budget looks like. Your service area map needs to be defined properly, your narrative and your network plan, and then all the documentation associated with that. So Philip, I'll stop here and see if there's any questions.
Okay, perfect, perfect. If anyone has any questions at this time, please enter them in the chat box, and we'll be happy to get those addressed. While we're doing that, Rob, I've got a couple of questions. Did I understand you earlier that the minimum requirement is 100 by 20, but the states can dictate a higher capacity rate?
We are seeing that in some states pushing 100/100 service. Vermont has done that. I believe Kentucky is thinking about that. We're seeing some movement in Ohio and potentially California moving that way. 100/100 service is not unachievable by fixed wireless. Your network just needs to be engineered for that properly. But we are not clear across the board yet what states are going to do what. Here in the Midwest, I've been in discussion with a number of broadband offices. They want to keep their options open as much as possible, but other states are moving forward with some intriguing decisions that we'll have to see what happens when they finally release a program.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Another question that I had was, do you anticipate them allowing the lower 6 gig band to be included as a licensed band?
It's unclear right now. Until the AFC is released for the 6 gigahertz band by the FCC, if it follows SAS rules, it might, but it's not quite the same, although they're trying to take some of the SAS learnings and apply it. So I think, again, we'll have to be open to that and see what happens, but it's not clear right now. At this point, since it's not a licensed spectrum, it is not available. So from a planning perspective,
Gotcha.
I think you have to look at alternatives right now until another ruling is made.
Okay. All right. All right. Perfect. Another question that we had, does this funding cover CapEx and OpEx expenses, or is there what are the limitations?
Just CapEx. All this is just CapEx. OpEx, like every other program that the FCC and RUS have done, is not included.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Another one came in. When do the states publish unserved and underserved constituent mapping data?
That is, I would expect that to be at the end of the year. However, the BDC map is open to the public to go look at this information. You do need to get a license from the FCC's provider of the map to be able to go investigate that, but that information is available.
Okay. All right. And I had another one. Are tribal entities eligible to apply for the funding?
Yes. The interesting piece of the market that has changed once the CAF2 auction was put in place is that prior to the CAF2 auction, which were the areas that were given back or not served by the CAF2 program, is that the government, the FCC, and now the NTIA stopped requiring you to be a carrier, a licensed carrier, an ILEC or a cable company or something else, a wireless carrier, CLEC. They do require you to get an eligible telecommunication carrier license in the state that you're operating in. So you do have to apply for a license as a CLEC or a carrier, but you can create that in the time frame it takes to do this. And so CAF2 and RDOF allowed consortiums of businesses, tribes, to create their own, in effect, internet service provider companies as long as they're licensed by the state. And they're continuing that with this.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Thank you. Any other questions for Rob before we head into the televerse piece of this? If you have any more questions, feel free to shoot them over to us. But right now, we're going to move over and let Rob talk about the T3 televerse platform, and we'll take it from there.
Thank you, Philip. So as I mentioned on the network, you really have to focus on the who are you going to serve, what are you going to serve, how are you going to serve, and the cost to serve. And relative to the BEAD program, we mentioned that you've got a business plan, your go-to-market sales marketing plan, your network and operations, and your funding model. All of those feed into each other as you're putting your grant application together. Obviously, who to serve will drive your sales and marketing and go-to-market planning, because it's going to be basically what your subscriber base looks like. What to serve is what we just talked about. Is it going to be all fiber? Is it going to be fixed wireless? Is it going to be all fixed wireless? Is it going to be a hybrid network? basically which areas are served by what technology, and then how to serve that, how you're actually going to go build that, deploy it, and operate it. And then that's all rolled up into a cost to serve, which then again feeds your business plan. So this is a virtual circle that feeds the grant application. And we at T3 have put together a portfolio of solutions called Televerse that basically covers all of those areas that affect both the BEAD grant application, but really any network design associated with primarily fixed wireless, but also we can do this with fiber networks. We break the Televerse portfolio into three main components. Teleposition, where you can geolocate with confidence, basically who can you serve and who can you not serve. The telepath, which is really your design and engineering platform associated with at what speeds can you serve those eligible subscribers that you can serve. And then the telenomics, or what are your capital costs to go build this, and how do you minimize your installation time and improve the customer experience by ensuring that what you build can be built and that it can be done economically. So this is the three things that we'll be talking about the rest of the presentation here. So challenges operators have to face, and this has been going on for decades, but especially with the government funded programs, how do you meet your obligated speed tiers? How do you ensure that what the home that you're covering meets that speed that you're required to cover for that? How do you improve customer acquisition? How do you ensure that when a customer calls up or goes online and asks for service, that they can actually be served? And once they can be served, how do you minimize your install times and your truck rolls? Those costs are very, very critical. So part of this is to correctly identify your customer locations, identify what the cap is to go spend on the network and the success CapEx to go install on a customer, and track that against the program requirements. And that's everything that the Televerse portfolio is really set out to do. So when we start with telepath. How do you validate that location that you're going to be serving is a serviceable, broadband serviceable location, and then it can actually be served, in this case, by fixed wireless. Many times our customers, even those that have been submitting for BDC mapping, are still challenging a lot of the locations based upon whether that's a proper location, whether the speeds can be met by them or their competitors or otherwise, or even if that location exists at all. So when you look at your serving territory that you're going to be serving for a BEAD grant application or any network, what you're trying to find are the actual broadband serviceable locations. And if you typically look at an address map from the post office or something else, you might get something in the middle where you have an address associated in the middle of a field, and it's the middle of a field and there's no home next to it, or there's no home at all, like these two examples, and the homes are on either side, and those aren't even listed properly. So it's important to understand what a location is, and is that a serviceable location? So the teleposition first coordinates with your data or third-party data, including the BDC data, on whether a home is a broadband serviceable location or not. The government's not always correct still. The BDC maps are still evolving. They'll probably take a few more years to settle in, but you'll still need to look at your home locations and validate that those are the ones you need to serve for a grant application. And so understanding what a home is, the green dots versus the red dots, is going to be critical so you don't undercount or overcount. And you also know where those locations are, especially in a fixed wireless or even a fiber network, to understand your cost to go serve those areas. Factors to consider have to be terrain, sometimes weather, your middle mile connections where you're backhauling your network to, existing infrastructure, if there's other tower locations or other networks you can tap into, seasonality, how trees affect the foliage patterns and things like that. We take all that into account when we look at trying to find these locations and validating with you how to serve these efficiently. Another area when you start looking at locations is things you have to know in advance are how dense some of the forests are, what the foliage heights are, terrain, tribal areas, weather and fade distances, water basins or floodplains. You might not want to be able to serve a home that's in certain of these conditions because they just can't be served reliably, and you don't want to tell a customer they can be served reliably if they can't, because that'll damage your reputation and also affect your cost recovery. But once you have an identification of these locations, which is critical and foundational to any design work for any type of network, we move into the telepath phase. And what telepath is a basically a two-phase process where we perform a questionnaire assessment with you as a customer, where we understand the location details, network information and assets, your customer requirements, your bandwidth requirements, your network topology and requirements, a number of other things that we put into a customer information questionnaire, which is a CIQ. And we basically bake that with the location data and the technology types that you've requested and come out with an initial network design. And depending on if you do an optional telenomics and an optional network cost. We review that with a customer and we assess whether these results are acceptable, whether we should add or modify anything. And if the results are good, then we move on to engineering or we tweak the results and reiterate again. The final engineering then provides information on a telepath, which is your final network design, any design artifacts, meaning anything that's associated with a fallout or a uniqueness that should be noted over and above the standard network practices, any economic costs, and then what we're really unique about for T3 is a subscriber eligibility report. And these outputs are actionable and they actually allow you to go start building your network with each of the aspects I discussed. Now, what does a subscriber eligibility report do? The table on the left is a small subset of what the SER is. Telepath calculates these solutions, and in the span of fixed wireless, it can tell you at the point of design whether a broadband serviceable location can be served or not. If you look at 123 main and 250 main, both of those locations can be at a 250 megabit per second speed tier, but 2341 First Street cannot be served at all. It is just not a location. We've had many customers tell us that they have spent hours trying to put up an antenna for a fixed wireless solution at a customer home, and their neighbor able to do that. And they've got an angry customer because they expected service, and then the network can't actually connect to that house, nor should it ever. And it's better to let a customer know at the point of sale that they're not eligible or eligible right now than to get them into the system, spend a lot of money to go build out, send a truck roll out there, and then fail them at the point of installation versus point of sale. So it's very critical with the SER that it gives you some of that information. It also shows you what other businesses and edge outs you can serve when you look at the enterprise and SMB market, which is not typically part of the BEAD program, although it can be used to help subsidize some of that. You can also see other areas that you can serve that can be incremental to your business. So the SER can be used to, again, identify speed tiers and point of sales, and also those customers that can and cannot be. But it tells a lot more information when I get to some other pieces of this. I apologize, I thought I had a slide on this. It also tells you, it can tell you, depending on how you've engineered the network, at what height you are attaching the fixed wireless antenna at the house, and at what tower sector you're going to be using. So from an operational standpoint, and again, we've had customers tell us that they put an antenna up and just start spinning it until they get a connection. We can actually tell you that it's at this azimuth, this up tilt, possibly this down tilt, depending on the house, and you're going to be connecting to this radio sector. And you can do that in a very, very short amount of time and get connected and get out, and the customer will be up and running quickly, and you're on to your next customer, versus spending time just going up there and trying to find a signal. So the SER serves customer acquisition. It serves what your lifetime value can be, because it shows you the speed tiers you can offer your customer up and down. And it can also operationalize your network for your field installers to tell you how you're going to go connect. It's a very, very critical aspect of looking at how you save money when you deploy, and also how you capture and have the best customer experience when you acquire a customer. The telenomics piece then looks at all of the cost aspects to, in a fixed wireless network, to look at a tower build, how many homes you're going to be passing, how many homes you're going to be connecting, and basically provides a cost per home passed and a cost per home connected based upon success, as well as other information like whether it's a microwave backhaul, fiber backhaul, it's a co-location, other things. This can all drive very specific economics. A co-location tower should have lower fees to go build than a new site, and it may be a very high density area to go do. You might have a lot of co-location opportunities, or you may choose to build on your own tower assets and have total control of that vertical asset and provide a much stronger capability, because then you have all control of the RAD centers too. The fundamental though is that, again, whether it's fixed wireless, we've done this with fiber, you can look at your cost budget for a site to pass a home as well as to connect a home as part of your grant opportunity. And that's critical. These are capital costs to go build the network to serve those locations. So how does this all come together? When we engage with you on a process, we have a qualification where we look at the scope. Do you have very strong location data? Do you have strong economics? Some customers have that, they just need the engineering. Some do not have good position, but they've got good economics. They just want the position of the telepath. Some want all three. Identify the scope, and then based upon what is in that scope, we start with teleposition to verify and validate your locations. We then go to telepath to go design your network and build the SER and define where your network assets are. And then again, if it's part of the program, we look at the cost to go do that on a cost per home pass basis. Fairly linear, fairly straightforward, very mature for T3 to do that for you. And then finally, again, we really do believe we can be a strong partner for you with any network design, as well as specifically with the BEAD program, because again, we have actionable outputs with our SER, our network design, our capital costs. We have extensive RF and fixed wireless covering national contracts, and we've done millions of homes designed for fixed wireless. And we've managed a few thousand end-to-end deployments nationally in terms of building the network from scratch. We have unique tools and processes. I showed you what the Televerse portfolio is. We have other tools that we use internally, and we use these in conjunction with other industry standard tools and processes. So you can be very confident that what we're giving you is good and correct work and actionable. We also have a very good, strong Esri ArcGIS capability for analysis on go-to-market planning, obviously on the home locations, and we can do a multi-data set analysis associated with any piece of that. And frankly, we've done customers from tier 1 all the way to very rural customers. Everyone's very happy, and we'd love to be able to help you with your BEAD work and your network design. That's it, Philip.
All right, well, great, Rob. Thank you so much. That was great. If you have any questions, please pop them in the question section of the chat, and we'll get those addressed. I've just got a few quick questions. And Rob, what, in terms of the Televerse product, what separates that between the other tools that are available from other vendors, other manufacturers?
Well, first, we're multi-vendor. We're really technology and vendor agnostic. So we can plug in multiple vendors. There's very good tools out there within a vendor community, but they tend to be limited to that vendor. You can't mix and match equipment or solutions associated with that. We don't really care what equipment you use. The results will still stand behind them, and they'll be very, very strong. So that's a piece of it. The other piece is that we can do extensions beyond that if necessary and provide other insights beyond what the standard, I think, vendor tools can do. So we in many cases will advise customers to drop certain sites because it just isn't worth it. Or economically, if you're looking at a tower site that only serves a few homes but acts as a microwave relay that covers hundreds of homes further down the network, we'll advise them that, you know, this isn't a passive network. This is a very critical component here. Don't drop that because you'll lose all these other benefits from it. So we're as much an advisory on this as here are the outputs, go build your network. We really want to stand with you all through the process. Okay,
perfect. Thank you. And then from a purchasing standpoint, is this purchased like a la carte with, you know, each one, or is it an all-inclusive purchase?
All of the above.
Okay.
We have business models that can do all of it. It's all services based. And it is, again, we sit down, figure out the scope first, and we can price it according to the scope.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Is this good for like a startup operator, existing operators, both?
Yep. We've done a lot of startup networks, and we've done a lot of brownfield networks also.
Okay. All right. Perfect. Perfect. Okay. Those are all the questions that I have. We've got just a couple more minutes left. I do, Rob, if you wouldn't mind, I want to go back to the BEAD funding for a second and just reiterate the time frame that you were going through from the planning, the application, the award, the schedule. I think we need to discuss that and reiterate as to how important the planning phase of this is, because I was taking some notes while you were talking about that, and that operators need to understand they have to get that letter of credit now, before it's submitted. They have to have their networks planned now. They have to have budgetary quotes prepared now. Just kind of, if you will, just kind of reiterate that in a nutshell for everybody so they kind of understand that.
Yeah, it is critical because of the pace BEAD is going to do and the amount of applications expected in each state. It is critical that you start planning now and start thinking about how you're going to do this, bringing a company like T3 or DoubleRadius in to help you do that. This is not the time to be passive, waiting for the states to get their final network design. You can speak to the broadband offices. We're doing so also. This is a time to plan, because once the states receive their approval from the NTIA, they're going to move very quickly. Some states are trying to do this in a handful of years, shorter than the 4 or 5 years that are being discussed right now. And that may mean that they're going to release and basically spend their budget possibly as early as next summer. So this is not something that you wait until March of next year. This is actually something you start planning on now, because these networks take time. The capital cost budgets need to be made, and then of course a letter of credit, like you said, Philip, needs to be made to making sure you've hit your piece of this. And that's only just the technical component. That's not your go-to-market strategy. You mentioned a startup earlier. Your go-to-market strategy, your staffing, your communities of interest that have to be discussed with the state to make sure that they've been included in your grant application. There's a lot of moving parts here to do that. We can help with all of that.
All right, well, perfect. Rob, we don't have any other questions, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. I want to thank everybody again for their time. Rob, thank you. This was very helpful for those of you out there in the audience who are going to start the planning phases. Reach out to your DoubleRadius rep for any questions that you might have, and we look forward to working with you guys on this stuff. So, and then also in closing, this was recorded. Olivia will be sending out an email follow-up with the recorded link to the recorded version. It will be posted on our YouTube channel as well. So again, thank you everybody for your time. I hope you found this helpful, and stay tuned for more webinars coming up from DoubleRadius. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.